My name is Jimmy Brink. I was born in Durham, Arkansas in 1938. And I went to school about 6 years at Durham, and they consolidated and I went to Elkins.
Tell me, what was it like growing up in Elkins?
Well, I was just a poor kid, but most of the others were just poor kids.
Tell me about, what was your family's business, and how did you help?
Well, my dad was farming, and I helped him during the summer there. And my mom was a seamstress. She worked for Campbell and Bales and some of the other stores.
So what jobs did you work out of school before you came to work for the county?
Well, I worked for Lewis Ford for 1 week, and I went to Washington State and worked for a pipeline contractor for that fall. And then after I come back, I worked for Camel Soup for a couple of years, and I worked for White River Telephone for approximately 2 years.
Well, how did you come to work for Washington County, and what did you do when you got there?
Well, I come in July of 1961, and the first thing that I really done is they was paving the Viney Grove blacktop, and back then they used RC or MC oil, which stuck your chips several days later. And I run a tractor and a drag broom on that job.
So what was that like back in the day making roads?
Well, this was chip seal, and it was pretty boring just dragging that drag broom over and over and over for several days where they had sealed.
How did your position over the years change for Washington County? Kind of walk me through how you started from doing the drag broom to where you ended up when you retired.
Well, I run a dozer for most of the time, and then I run a grader and quite a bit of the other equipment. And we worked on road construction, and at that time, the county done several state and federal aid jobs, which was engineered by the highway department, and I got some good experience of working because they was set by grade stakes and stuff, and I got good experience of working on that. And over years period and stuff, I got the promotion, and I was over new construction for quite a little while. And then the superintendent left, and I was promoted to superintendent. That was under Val Lester.
Talk about some of the projects you remember back in the early days that you worked on.
Well, we worked on the the Lincoln to Weddington Road, which was state aid, and we worked on the Stonewall Road, which was under state aid, and I also worked on the Cove Creek Road under the state aid projects.
So what would the roads have been like when you started, and what were they like when you finished?
Well, it's kind of like the older day pickup versus the modern day. They've been tremendous change, and most of the roads when I started was gravel roads, and when I retired they was a lot more blacktop road, hot mixed, and chip seal roads.
How many miles? Talk about how many miles of road there were and what a challenge it was.
Well, back when I started, I ran a grader for quite a little while, or after I'd been here a while. And the grader man I worked with was Mr. Cheatham, and he had from, say, like Savoy to the Cincinnati, all the west part of the county, and you didn't get over the roads very often back then because it was an awful big district.
Tell me about some of the different county judges. Who'd you start with, and then tell a little bit about each of the ones that you worked with over the years.
Well, I started with Bruce Crider in '61, and I run a dozer quite a bit, and I run a grader quite under Bruce. And then I worked for Arthur Martin, and that's when we was doing several of the state aid roads. And then I worked for Gene Thrasher, and Gene was the one that opened the road up from 45 Highway, which is now 265 or Trammell Highway, up from 45 Highway up to past Lake Fayetteville. We worked it all the way on up to almost 412, and which that is one of the very main roads for travel this day and time.
Tell me more about that project.
Well, when you started there at 45 Highway, there was no road after about 500 feet from 45 over to the new fire station with a Christmas tree at it at the old War Road. And you crossed the old War Road, there was no road. He cut that through to Joyce Street. And when you hit Joyce, you went behind the new Signature Bank for about a quarter, and then you went up over a steep hill, which was where Mrs. Street owned the property at the foot of the hill. And one day at lunch, I had left the dozer about 100 feet from the top of the hill up there, and I'd walk back down after lunch to start, and Miss Street was up there, and she was kind of an older lady, and I guess I was kind of listening to her sympathy. And Judge Thrasher come down over the hill, and he said, "Brink, get to work," and said, "Miss Street, you get to the house," or said, "I'll take your front porch off." And that was pretty easy to understand. Brink went to work. But then it come out over there at on Zion Road, and it went down Zion Road, turned and went to the side of Berner's funeral home, which there was no road on towards 412, and that was opened up. And when you got up to, I think it's Ivy Lane, where the new 4-lane, where the trees is in the divider, it ends right there, and they goes back into open lanes, and we worked that back then. I would have never thought that it would have been one of the major traveled roads at the time.
Tell me more about the other judges.
Okay, I think Val Lester was the next judge, and I worked on road construction, and he was in for 10 years, worked for him for 10 years, and near the last he promoted me to road superintendent, which the superintendent had left. And then Judge Johnson come in, and I worked for Judge Johnson for 20 years, and Bill DeVault was, I worked with Bill for 21, which Bill went ahead and retired under Judge Hunton, and I served 1 year under Judge Hunton, and they brought on Frankie Dittmeyer as a kind of a trainee to replace me, and I worked with Frankie there for 1 year, which I knew and worked with Frankie as a grader operator for several years. Frankie was an excellent grader hand in the west part of the county.
Tell me a little bit about Judge Johnson. What was he like?
He was a pretty aggressive businessman. When he went into to the judgeship, he was a businessman, and he was, maybe wasn't the most knowledgeable on roads, but he was aggressive and done some very good things for the county, getting the 1 cent sales tax passed for the ambulance and the road and the general fund, give the county money to operate, repair equipment that passed, and if it tore up in December, it might sit on the yard till January before it got fixed to the new budget. He also did set up a bridge program, pouring the slabs and 20 and 30-foot slabs and mounting them on the truck and hauling them out and putting them on top of the piers and stuff, which speeded up the construction of the bridges. And he also was pretty aggressive, and he was the one that actually got the county in the crusher business. And the county started in the crusher at Durham, and then they was at Frank James's over on the Black Oak Road, and then they purchased land at Mara, a little over 100 acres, and which they had been a quarry there. McClinton had done 45 Highway, and they had a small quarry there, and it had come a big flood and washed all of Fly Creek away, and we made an agreement to shoot the rocks and use them to repair the flood damage. And it was just about a quarter of a mile off of the Fly Creek Road, so we could use the rock trucks for the haul, not tear our other trucks up. And he started the asphalt overlay, because at the time there was just very few that bid in on the state aid projects, and he could approve, him and the state could approve it if it was 15% over the estimated cost, but some of the jobs was over 20%, and he decided it was time the county got in the asphalt business, and he had a very successful program at that.
Tell me about Judge Hunton.
Jerry took over after Judge Johnson retired, and Jerry was a very aggressive, and he continued a very good program. I worked for Jerry for 1 year, and he started putting the limestone rock on several of the dirt roads or gravel roads, and then before I retired, he told me he was going to pave several of the gravel roads without as much construction as what had been done on them in the past. And he paved lots of roads and helped the people out.
Tell me about bridges. You had some pictures earlier of bridges, some of the many bridge projects you worked on. Talk about some of those.
Well, most of this started under Judge Johnson, because they went and looked at the precast bridge forms in Kansas, and they built a bridge building down on the old road department on Gregg Street, and they could pour the slabs and the tops in the bad weather, and then stockpile them and haul them out to the jobs. We could build a 20-foot bridge or a 30-foot, or you could use extra piers, you know, and build longer bridges. And he did also start the box culvert program. We kind of engineered a little way that you could build them, and excuse me, at the time we built the bridges, the boxes, with a top on them, say like 5 feet tall, and then we changed it where we could pour 2 4s and change the interlocks and make an 8-foot bridge. They was, if I remember correctly, they was 8 feet long, and the height, or that we determined.
Talk about the difference between for some people may not know what a box culvert is and how that's different from maybe a whistle. Talk about the different types of bridges.
Well, some of them is on the bridges, you pour an abutment and the piers, and then you set the top on. And we did build some. I think there's probably a 7-span on the West Fork River. No, it's the Middle Fork River near King Cemetery, out by the Black Oak Church, and that was probably one of the longest. The worst problem with that is where the shorter spans is in a river. You have more trouble with the trees washing in it, and have to clean the debris up. And the box culverts, instead of like a 4-foot tile, the box culverts would be a square, or say they could be 6 foot tall, 2 sections, make 6 foot, and that gives you a lot more flow than just a culvert. And he used them a lot where you'd get a flood and it'd wash out part of the town, and you'd have to put 5 or 6 loads of gravel. You could replace that tile with one of these boxes, which you poured there at the shop, and you hauled it out and dug it out and put it in one day and filled it and got the traffic back over it. And your problem was more or less solved on it washing out again, where you done the hydraulics to see how much water flow you had.
How important were these roads for the people that lived out in the county?
Well, very important, because the majority of the county folks works in cities anymore, and they need to get, and the school buses, it's one of the most important things, keeping traffic rolling.
Talk about some of the challenges you faced over the years. Besides, obviously funding was one, but like the big ice storms and the big snows and stuff. How does that impact the crews?
Well, back in the earlier days, we wasn't very well prepared. They had the graders that they could use, and then they would load a dozer up if it was a big drift or something had to be plowed out. Because I remember one time we'd been to Mineral Springs and left the dozer at the state shop that night and moved it down to the Woolsey Bridge and to go up on the mountain across from the Woolsey Cemetery, and the truck couldn't get very far off 71, and when I unloaded the steel on that pavement, I began to look towards Winslow and see if there was a trailer truck or something coming, because I thought I was sliding into 71 highway. And but later on, Judge Johnson had a snow plan, and they bought snow plows for the trucks, and we built a chip building there where we could keep the chips dry, because in the bad weather, if chips has got moisture and you get them out on the road, they'll freeze in the chip beds. So you had to have your chips dry. At the time, we didn't ever use any salt or anything, and I don't know what their plan is, this day and time. I know it's been improved.
What about some of the other projects or challenges y'all face, weather and stuff like that?
Well, in the bad weather, back years ago, we didn't have the material to fight the problems, and after they got in the crushing business, you could have different types of limestone for different situations, and you could cure the problem where before you might have put in some creek gravel or hillside or something, and it didn't cure the problem. And
Tell about some of the people that you work with here. You mentioned some of them earlier, but tell me more about them. Some of your top officials here that you worked with.
well, I worked with Bill DeVault for quite some time, or 21 years, and Bill was an excellent person at putting it on paper, and he was very helpful to the program. And I worked with Frankie Dittmeyer, which was road superintendent after 2000, and Frankie was an excellent grader man, and he had the territory over Piney Grove, Prairie Grove, and in that area, and you didn't get any calls in Frankie's district because Frankie took care of his clientele.
Who are some of the people, do you remember dealing with people a lot? Did y'all get a lot of complaints or calls? What was it like dealing with the public?
Well, I can tell you a few instances that we had a lady down at Cane Hill that felt like the road was going to McClellan Processing was on her property, and it got where we need to call the sheriff's department, send a deputy down to stay with Addie while we was working on that road. One time we was putting in a tile down there, and the sheriff had sent Mr. Skinner down, one of the deputies, and we had started to put the tile in, and I wasn't there, but the tile supervisor, she come over and she shot through the grader. The grader operator said she didn't plan on hitting him because she's too good a shot. But we took some of the tires to the shop, and the bullets was in them. And you could see where one of the bullets had hit the grader moldboard because the brass showed on the moldboard. And so they took her to jail, but Mr. Davis, I got her out, I think, that same day. I don't know where they kept the guns or not. But we had that incident, and we was probably 6 years later. I was at Sunset, and we was gonna haul some gravel on this road. And I had really forgot that, that we had, because we hadn't had any problems for a long time. Well, Addie come out and was gonna have problems with the trucks hauling graders, the gravel past the processing plant. So the grader man called me, and I told him, I said, well, just go ahead and leave, because we hadn't called a deputy to come down. And so, but that was an entrance. And then we had another one time I was over about Savoy, and they called me and said, you need to get the wolf down. And Irvin Beeks was the grader over there, and he was cleaning the road up a little, and the man come out and pulled a pistol on him. Irvin said, I wasn't scared. Said, I thought about jumping down on him, but he said he was below me. He might have shot up. But we've had several different little occasions. Them was probably two of the most serious, But when you're in politics and working for the public, it's pretty hard to satisfy the whole clientele.
How were most of the people that you dealt with over the years?
Nice, very, very cooperative and stuff. And the majority understood that you couldn't do some things that they would like for you to do.
What are some of the stories maybe that I haven't thought to ask you about that you remember, some of the things that stand out over the years?
I guess since I'm retired, I could tell this one. And the other judge, he's retired too. But at one time, we was going to work the what they call the Middle Fork Road, County Road 51, and I had come in that afternoon, and the neighbor was setting cedar trees, wild cedar trees, out on the right-of-way that the county had acquired. So I said, Mr. Cotton, the county's gonna rebuild this road. No, they're not gonna do anything. Well, he come up, I told him, I said, I have the plans here in my folder and stuff, and he come up that night and I showed him, I said, the only thing that would hold this back is if the project for this year didn't get completed, you know, or we're completing them might run next year's behind. Well, he stood and argued I was eating supper for probably an hour and a half there. And so my son said, Mr. Cotton said, you know that's right. And my wife was pretty nervous because he'd had a heart attack in the past. And I was about ready to show him the road because, you know, that was on my time. And Judge Johnson said, well, y'all just got in the truck and rode down the road with him there and got out. And I said, well, Judge, you know, on my time, at my house, you know, I'm not going to embarrass you on your time. But when we did work the road, he sent the county a bill, I believe it was $3,400 for those wild cedars that he had set out. And Roger Haney was the judge's assistant. He said, what do you think about that? I said, I wouldn't give him a dime. Where he had been notified, you know, that, and it was on the existing right-of-way that he was setting. I tried not to embarrass whoever I was working with especially on their time. On my time, sometimes I might be a little irate or something.
What about the JPs that you might have dealt with over the years? Who were some of the ones that you remember working with, and what were they like?
Well, most of the JPs has been pretty easy to work with. Sometimes when they first come on, they don't understand what problems the county does have, you know, not being able to answer some of their needs. But I worked with one that I can remember come to my retirement party was Jessie Bryant, and I guess I was in Jessie's corner because she just hugged me big. But I have worked with several JPs, and they seem to be really no big problem.
Talk about the difference in the funding when you started to what it was like by the time you left. How much different?
Well, on some of that, I probably don't really know anything about, you know, for 15 or 16 years. Because I worked for 38 and a half, and a lot of the time I was out in the areas of doing work and stuff. But when the county really became more efficient was when the 1 cent sales tax was passed for the ambulance and the road and general fund. It'd give the county some money to repair the equipment and buy some new equipment and stuff. And that's when things began to progress that I'm aware of. And the county used their money pretty wisely because they is a 1 cent sales tax that was designated to the counties. And I think when I retired, the county was getting about $220,000 a year that they could set up projects with, which at the time we was on 80-20 because we had some funds. They did set it up on 90-10, but we stayed with the 80-20 because we did have a little more money than some of the more backward counties or that didn't have the tax base. But
So
it was pretty efficient back in when I retired. I mean, of course, it's like everything else. The dollar's not as worth as much as it was back then.
If somebody who didn't know anything about Washington County came to you and said, "Hey, tell me about your home county, Washington County. What's it like?" What would you tell them?
I'd tell them that it was pretty aggressive and pretty forward, and it was not a backward county, and that if I had a choice to live in Washington County or move, I'd go ahead and try to finish my years out in Washington County.
How would you finish this sentence? My favorite thing about Washington County is...
That might be a hard question for me because really Washington County is probably the only county that I've associated too much with. We did do some kind of joint ventures with, say, Benton County, or a little with Madison County on some tile or something that was on the roads that was on joint roads.
What's something that most people probably don't know about the road department? Well, one thing most people don't know about the road department is what?
That there's more than one road. The road in front of your house is not the only road that there's problems with, that the county's trying to do their best to serve everybody.
Anything else?
Well, I just, from 1961 till the present, I've got this to say, that I felt like the judges has performed good and their employees has done a good job. And from 61 till 2000, there was lots of progress made, and there's still progress being made from 2000 on.
If someone said, "What was your biggest accomplishments?" What would you say?
Well, the improvement in the roads as a whole, getting them rebuilt, and bridges, and the box culvert deal was an awful big advantage, because you could replace the tile and your problem was cured of having to haul 5 or 6 loads of gravel out there, and the inconvenience to the people. And I think that's helped the people about as much as anything, because the box culvert is concrete, and most of your tile was metal, and 15 to 20 year normally is the extent of the life of them. I'm just proud that I was able to help participate in some of the progress.